Yeah, today, my relatives, hello. It is Tuesday, November 30th. This is the last day of Native American Heritage Month 2021, and I'm sitting down drinking my second cup of coffee. And I wanted to just take a few moments to kind of wrap up and talk about some thoughts about Native American Heritage Month in general, as well as specifically about Native American Heritage Month 2021. But before I begin, as I always do, let me start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from what's now known as Washington, D.C., and that these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. Again, I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands and just state how humbled I am to be living on and working from these lands today. So I have my Piscataway relatives. So today is the last day of Native American Heritage Month, and I had hoped I would be able to do a lot more live streaming throughout the month and highlight different things, but my month got busier than I had originally planned. And so I was not able to do many of the things I had hoped I'd be able to do. Um, but there were several good things that happened throughout the month and things we were able to talk about during my second cup of coffee time here with you, and I'm grateful and appreciative for that. I'm also grateful for the opportunity that our nation has had to reflect a bit more on Native American heritage and Native peoples and the history of this land and this nation. I think this year, more than any other, I at least heard more debate around the mythology of Thanksgiving, and that was good to hear that a little bit more. Um, I think, though, however, because of the way the month ended, right, which was yesterday was yesterday was the 157th anniversary of the massacre at Sand Creek. Obviously, we had Native American Heritage Day on Black Friday, which was the day everyone's so distracted they can't pay attention to anything with shopping. And then, of course, just the things I shared and talked about throughout the month regarding Thanksgiving and how it really is a celebration of the genocide of Native peoples. It is both the colonizers from England as well as even Abraham Lincoln calling on people, giving thanks to God for the fruits of the genocide and ethnic cleansing they were actively committing. And so that's really the challenge with Native American Heritage Month is we have this month where we set aside to honor Native peoples, to honor Native culture, to acknowledge our presence in these lands. And yet we have at the end of that month so many things on our calendars that are absolutely dishonoring. And they celebrate even the fact that we were ethnically cleansed, our numbers were thinned out, we were practically virtually removed from these lands. And our nation still doesn't deeply grapple with that. We've had more discussion about that this past month or this past year, but we still don't wrestle with this at a very deep level. And as I was kind of contemplating this, I was looking at my good friend Levi Rickert, who is the person who founded Native News Online, and he and I have been friends for almost 20 years now. And I deeply respect what he's done to kind of bring Native news to our not only our country but even to the world. And I've written many op-eds for Native News Online. I've done some work with them on stories here in DC in the past. And I wanted to just highlight an article that he wrote because I think he captured some of what I'm feeling pretty well in his most recent op-ed that he published. I think it was this morning or yesterday. I'm going to share it in the comment section here. It's called "You Are on Potawatomi Land: Reflections of Native American Heritage Month" by Levi Rickert. And he talks about in this article, he shares a story of traveling down to Chicago from Grand Rapids, where he lives, to visit family. And he sees a large mural with the word Potawatomi on it. And as he investigates more of what that mural there is about, He begins to learn and understand some of the history behind even Chicago. I encourage you to read the whole article, but I want to read a few sections of it. This is kind of from the middle and towards the end. So he says, a little known fact is that after Chicago's Great Fire in 1871, when Miss O'Leary's cow accidentally knocked over a lantern that burned the city, the debris was pushed into Lake Michigan, creating a landfill from the current lake's boundary to present-day Michigan Avenue. This increased land infringed on the water rights of the Potawatomi, which through the Treaty of Greenville of 1795, which one of my ancestors signed, granted a portion of Lake Michigan south of the Grand River in Michigan to south of the Milwaukee River in Wisconsin to the Potawatomi. So the land between present-day Michigan Avenue and the current boundary of a portion of Chicago was technically unceded. In 1914, 8 Pokagon Potawatomi filed a lawsuit, Williams versus the City of Chicago, 242 U.S. 434, in the U.S. District Court in Northern Illinois. Their lawsuit cited the Treaty of Greenville. When the Potawatomi were forced westward during the Trail of Death in 1837, the land was lost but remained unceded. The case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The highest court of the land decided that the Potawatomi abandoned the territory and ruled against the 8 plaintiffs. So he points out that the forced removal of the Potawatomi from this land that was technically unceded was ruled by the courts as them abandoning their land, and therefore the land belonged to the state of Illinois and to the city of Chicago. At the end of he closes his op-ed with this paragraph, and he says, as part of celebrating who we are, and reflects on, we've paid more attention to Native issues in the past few years than we have previously. He said, we must support the land back movement. Its artwork, this is the group that is responsible for the mural in Chicago, and its purpose. He said, while I am lifted by the increased attention on Native Americans, the issue of stolen land and phony Supreme Court decisions, we must ensure that these celebrations and added attention are not just happening in November, but year-round. And I think that's the problem with these issues, right? Which is they're not over. We still celebrate Thanksgiving, which is a holiday founded on praising God for the genocide of Native peoples. We still have Supreme Court decisions to this day acknowledging the doctrine of discovery and that natives are savages and not therefore sovereign over their own lands. None of these issues are resolved. And so, well, it's good and beneficial that we're at least talking about them a little bit more. They're not resolved. And because these issues deal with land titles, not just the land titles of white men, but the land titles of everybody living here in the United States of America, there is very little willingness to address these at the root issue. Right? Even giving land back to tribes is problematic. Why? Because tribes don't technically have sovereignty over our own lands. You give the land back to the trust, which is held by the government. So the bittersweetness, let me rephrase that. The bitterness that I tasted after some of the sweetness earlier in the month, the bitterness of Thanksgiving the bitterness of Native American Heritage Day being on Black Friday, the bitterness of our nation literally ignoring the Sand Creek Massacre that happened on November 29th. The bitterness of land titles still being based on the notion that natives aren't human and don't have rights to our land. Before we can truly celebrate Native American heritage and honor Native peoples as full citizens of this land, we need to decide as a nation, do we really want to acknowledge us as full citizens? Or is it too convenient to have the legal understanding that we're savages so that everybody can keep their titles to their homes? Now, I know this sort of emotion doesn't just happen for Native peoples. I know many other marginalized groups within our nation. African Americans come to mind very quickly, right? None of these things are resolved. And so it's hard to celebrate taking baby steps when our own humanity is still not being fully acknowledged and recognized. And I know for people who are not directly affected by these things, it's easy to say, well, we're making progress. Well, we're moving. Until our humanity is fully acknowledged, it's hard to call the steps we're making progress. So anyway, these are just some of the thoughts I've had around this. And I want to expand on them a little bit more and just tell you about some stuff we've been doing here in our family these past few days, which has also added to the bittersweetness of Native American Heritage Month. My daughter, who is in school here in DC, they were assigned to analyze a poem. And they had to memorize it, write a 500-word essay analyzing it, and then perform it in school. And my daughter, they were given several poems that they could choose from, and she didn't know any of the poems. And so she chose the poem, The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. And she came back home and she was studying it and reading it and asked for my help to look at it. And so we were working on memorizing it over the Thanksgiving Day weekend or the week before Thanksgiving. And then last weekend, she was working on analyzing it and writing the report on it. And this poem is notable because it was the first inaugural poem, right? Robert Frost was the first inaugural poet at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. And this poem was specifically requested by JFK to be read at his inauguration. I want to read the poem for you, and then we can discuss it. The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. The land was ours before we were the land's. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. She was ours in Massachusetts, in Virginia, but we were England, still colonials, possessing what we still were unpossessed by, possessed by what we now no more possessed. Something we were, withholding made us weak until we found out that it was ourselves. We were withholding from our land of living, and forthwith from salvation, found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright. The deed of gifts was many deeds of war, to the land vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced. Such as she was, such as she would become. Right? This poem is dripping in Doctrine of Discovery, white supremacy, and promised land narrative and theology. Right? It's absolutely dripping with it. The land was ours before we were the land's. That's the Doctrine of Discovery. The last line, second to last line, unenhanced, unstoried, artless. Again, this land was empty before white people came and gave it life. The deeds of gift was the many deeds of war. My daughter and I went through this poem line by line, talking about it. My daughter has heard me speak. She knows the content. And while she hasn't read my book, she knows it because she's traveled with me. She's heard me speak many times. They hear me talking here on the live streams. My children know what I talk about. And as we walked through and talked through this poem, it was disgusting how dripping this poem was. And this was, again, the first inaugural poem. This last year, Amanda Gorman read a poem at Joe Biden's inauguration and did a fabulous, fantastic job. But the tradition of an inaugural poet is this poem and Robert Frost's reading of it. And so again, this is the bittersweetness of it. I've asked my daughter for permission to share her paper with you at some point. I'm hoping to be able to do that sometime in early December if she allows me to share that paper with you, because I love what she did with it. And she performed it yesterday. And as we were talking about how can she perform this poem without giving credence to it, we decided that one of the things what she did, the best way we decided to have her perform it was to preface the poem by doing a land acknowledgement. And basically, without saying it, but by doing a land acknowledgement, pointing out that this poem is utterly false. Almost a silent protest. So anyway, she did that yesterday, and I was extremely, extremely proud of her for what she did. But this is some of the the bittersweetness of this, right? It's hard to so I have great hope that young people are continuing to press forward with these issues and to raise them up and to highlight them and to educate even their teachers and their classmates on these things. But there's so much more work to do. And so it's hard to fully celebrate Native American Heritage Month because while there's a lot of good things going on within Indian country, it also is a stark reminder of how much work needs to be done. Anyway, those are my thoughts about this past month and what we have ahead of us. I want to share a few. I didn't share. I'll actually share the quote, the line to that poem with you. Not the line, but the link to that poem. The gift outright. And this is one of the places that we found it. And so I just put that into the link there. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being interviewed on an Instagram channel by Natasha Robinson. And we had a really good discussion about the book I co-authored, Unsettling Truths, and I want to just share that link in there with you. And then tonight, I have the opportunity to speak at Hope Church Astoria in New York. And it's going to be a virtual event, and they're going to have both a webinar on Zoom as well as live stream it onto Facebook. And so if you would like to be in the webinar, I'm going to share the link to that webinar where you can register for it yet today. And then you can be in that webinar this evening. And if you would like to watch it, just watch it live on Facebook. That's going to be this evening at 7 p.m. And I'm sharing the Facebook channel where you should be able to find that live stream this evening at 7 p.m. I'll try to share it on my social media just before we go live again. But I wanted to give those two links to you tonight. I'm going to be giving a kind of an abbreviated version of my Doctrine of Discovery talk. I'll be talking about how we got from the teachings of Jesus to the Doctrine of Discovery. I'll be talking about how it gets embedded into our foundations, and then how it becomes the narrative of this country. So we'll be talking a lot around the themes of the dysfunctional theological imagination, probably ending, because again, this is the last day of Native American Heritage Month, with my critique of Abraham Lincoln and what we celebrate as Thanksgiving here in this country. But if you'd like to join the webinar, there's a link above. If you would like to just watch it live on Facebook, I put that link in there too. But yeah, I hope you're able to join this night. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And it's Hope Church Astoria, which is in New York City. So I hope you are having a good day. I really appreciate these times where we can talk about some things over my second cup of coffee. I still have not given up the idea of having guests on with me more frequently, and I'm creating a list of people I'd like to have on with me. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to start doing that. Now my schedule gets a lot lighter. Today is actually my last planned event. This thing I'm doing this evening is my last event until the middle of January. And so I have almost 6 weeks to kind of think through some of my material and get some stuff sorted out with my social media, and hopefully get into a better pattern with some of my live streams, both my sunrises as well as with my second cups of coffee. But yeah, I hope to use this next month well, as I have a much more downtime in my schedule, at least my public schedule. So I can't have my relatives. Have a great day. Walk in beauty, and maybe learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.